Hello and welcome to our latest webinar from movisens on the COVID-19 impact on research in an ambulatory assessment setting. This time we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to go straight into our interviews with our researchers that we've been talking to regarding the impact that COVID-19 has had on their work and how they've managed to pivot and adapt and still conduct their research during these times. So firstly, we have from the University of Vienna, the Clinical Psychology Department, Anja Feneberg, who's currently pursuing her PhD at the Lab of Social, Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience and investigating psychopathology, neurocorrelates of empathy, and the cross-cultural variability of psychological traits. And we're also joined by Ekaterina Pronizius, or Katja, who is also pursuing her PhD at the same lab and doing similar studies. And the latest study that they've done is their collaboration with Dr. Paul Forbes, Dr. Klaus Lamb, Urs Nata, Georgia Silani, Nadine Skaluda, and Anna Stichevich. So the study is the COVID-19 crisis, stress, mood and behavior, an ecological momentary assessment study.
We'll commence our interview, talking with Ekaterina and Anja in Austria. So could you tell me a little bit about the research that you've been involved with over the past year?
Yes, so we were both, together with many others, involved in a rather large EMA study that's called the COVID-19 crisis, stress, mood and behavior. So basically it was a large EMA study that we conducted both in Austria and Italy.
Okay, and so obviously the crisis itself obviously prompted the idea for this study, but what sort of work were you doing beforehand? Were you also doing things based on mood and stress in an EMA context? Was that sort of your background to begin with, and you just then brought that over to the current situation?
Yeah, so the study is a collaboration study between the lab that I'm working in, the stress lab, and two other labs. And so the lab I'm working in, we were basically doing quite a lot of EMA research before on stress and mood, but it was totally different. So yeah, we usually had participants come into our lab for a first meeting with instructions, handing over all the material, and also with much more smaller sample sizes. So we basically needed to adapt and be creative.
Yeah, of course. So was there a reason that you actually had previously small sample sizes? Was there a particular focal sort of cohort that you were looking at?
Yeah, with small, I rather mean between like, say, minimum 30 to maximum 100 individuals,
Sure. Yeah.
Which is like rather, I think, average size.
Sure.
And so now we're talking about over 1,000 individuals that actually started this COVID EMA study.
Okay, wow.
That's a different dimension.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at what time, I remember sitting back in sort of April thinking, yeah, in a few weeks, it'll be fine. At what point did you kind of really go, actually, you know what, this is something that's going to be long haul and more serious, and it's something that's really deserving of study? Was there a particular thing that occurred, or was it just really the culmination of many different events?
I think Klaus Lamb, so the head of the other group, together with Georgia Silani, they came up basically with the idea rather soon, like as soon as the acute lockdown phase was proclaimed.
Okay.
And so we started to plan, I think, mid-March, doing all, setting up the study, figuring out how to implement it. And the initial plan was actually also to have some kind of baseline after, like when life got back to normal. But obviously that did not really happen yet. So yeah, we in the end ended up with having two measurement bursts, one starting from April until May, more or less. And the other one was when the second hard lockdown was proclaimed in Austria, November, December.
Okay, so yeah, in 2020, obviously. And did you notice some really marked differences, like just as the lockdown drew on in the, I guess, the willingness to participate, or was there a relatively good compliance all throughout the study?
I would say overall the compliance was really good. So I think we were really overwhelmed actually of how many individuals wanted to participate, right, Katja?
Yeah, I can add to this, so that we were lucky enough that we had an access to a participant pool, which is provided by our university and our faculty. And in this participants pool, we have not only students, but we also have people from general population. But we were both a bit anxious. We thought, like, because the lockdown, there was an end of the lockdown, so we needed to be fast. And we were a bit anxious whether many participants would participate in our study. So we were placing advertisements on Facebook, on different channels, and we were surprised how many emails we got from the people who wanted to become a part of our study. And at some point, even we had to say, sorry, we don't take you anymore, because we calculated, of course, the dropouts. We were also thinking about what is if certain participants would not reach the response rate which we would like to have. But even when we added all these numbers, we said, okay, it's getting out of hand because, of course, for financial reasons, and we were able to achieve our sample size which we were aiming. So it was we were surprised how many wanted to participate.
Okay, sensational. So you already had this existing sort of pool that you could kind of advertise within and draw from. And did you do any other sort of measures to try and bolster the numbers, or like some sort of emails, or was it word of mouth from the existing participants that had you flooded with emails wanting to participate?
Now, everything together, it's of course our participants pool, then Facebook groups, Twitter, homepage, and I think that's what's it. It was enough to.
So social media was actually useful for something, for a change.
Yes.
How novel. And you mentioned obviously it was a cooperative exercise with another university in Italy. How did this affect the communication between the institutions with all the different lockdowns? Obviously, face-to-face meetings are completely out of the question in this scenario. So was it just an excessive amount of teleconferencing, or what was the process to keep everything moving and smooth?
I can add. I don't know. Yeah, I can add to this. So first of all, of course, everything was online. And online communication and emails, and it was also good that we were using your app where the participants could collect the data, provide the data online. So of course this was easy. But once we tried another measurement, we wanted to collect hairs from the Italian sample, and it was something else, and it didn't work out because it was impossible to send the envelopes to Italy. It was too much delay in time, and so we just forgot this idea because this would not be possible.
So those were the logistical issues of actually expanding the study were just too problematic. I mean, normally when, as Anja mentioned, you get participants into the lab to obviously sign up. So how did you go about adjusting your process to getting people signed up to the study and actually dealing with those different challenges of not being able to actually meet them face to face and conducting the interview?
Mm-hmm. Shall I answer, or Katja, do you want?
I can add later if you want to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so as Katja mentioned, we had a really huge distribution and advertisements for the study. And we had participants first write us the email, and then we sent them the links to get their smartphones coupled. So what we did not have, as we usually do, is like an intense instructional session that is usually verbal with the possibility to ask questions, and no big manual that we usually provide too. So we had, I think, a 2 pages trouble sheet with the most basic information, because we also did not want participants to need to read a lot. And of course, we needed to tell participants, okay, you can only participate if you have an Android smartphone. So this was one necessity for this study. And the other thing was that we provided contact information, email addresses, and we had, in case of questions or technical difficulties, and we actually had student assistants and interns working in shifts, always checking the email account if there were any questions coming in, so that we could actually answer as quickly as possible, because our study was also planned for just 7 days, so 1 week.
So the importance of like a higher level of support was probably obviously a bigger challenge. So to make sure that you're gathering as much data as possible on the compliance.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and especially that the supports should be provided really during the whole day and pretty fast. So our interns were instructed such way that first of all, they need to answer, thank you very much for your email. We will work on this. We will try to solve this problem for you. If they don't have an answer for this problem, then they contacted us. We maybe, if we didn't know what to do, then contacted you. So, but the participants knew we are working on this problem. Yeah. And what was also interesting for me, I provided my Skype name, and I said that everyone can contact me if they have any issues, because I thought maybe for someone it's easier to call than to write an email. And I was a bit scared. I thought maybe I would get a lot of calls, but only one person wrote me a message. So didn't call, just wrote me a message, and the whole communication was done by emails. And I personally think it was really the best way. Somehow it worked great for everyone. Everyone was happy, and there was no other channels needed. So this was the emails, being there during the weekend, because we did it whole week, of course, also Saturday, Sunday. And we also prepared frequently asked questions for our interns. So they had a document, and they were updating this document if new questions were coming from the participants. And the other intern could read the answers if something similar.
So keeping like a track of the support issues and so on. So yeah, that's actually, I think obviously it's always wonderful when people feel acknowledged, and then they're far more, it increases compliance as well when people actually feel that they have a sort of a lifeline. And we often recommend sort of putting in like a do not disturb button occasionally on the sampling schema, because then people will rarely push it, but they know they have that power to just switch it all off for an hour if they need to. So on the sampling schema, how often did you actually sample per day? Was it random or fixed time?
Yeah, it was semi-random. So yeah, we had I think 4 prompts during the day, and the first one started between 10 and 11. So that was actually not easy, because we knew, okay, there is already some research that maybe the diurnal rhythm of individuals might change when just being at home in lockdown. And there were actually 4 prompts during the day, and the last one self-initiated before going to bed. So we wanted to actually have like the during the day fluctuations. Sure. So that's how we
did you notice a lot of very late bedtimes during?
Yes, there are some actually that came up more or less during the large data cleaning process. And so, yeah, we needed to find some strategies on how to figure out whether these last data entries were actually still the ones before going to bed, or whether individuals just thought about, oh, I forgot it yesterday, so I'll do it on 6 a.m. in the morning when I wake up.
Sure. So there might be a little bit of a problem in the data there. Okay, yes.
Yeah,
tricky.
you need to somehow find a cutoff point and check the data, and then try to find a good solution that is statistically as sound as possible in that way.
Well, could I just say on a side note, that's where a physiological measure, like a physical activity tracker, would really help out, because then you could actually track sleep time and wake time as well.
Yeah.
So just to plug the rest of the products, obviously.
We actually adjusted that also in our second measurement burst. So we actually asked participants, how long did you sleep? When did you go to bed the next morning?
Okay. Try and catch them out a little.
A little bit, but still, like, we could not actually do actigraphy because of the high number of participants.
Sure. Yeah, it's probably a little bit prohibitive in the scales we're talking about.
No.
So where do you identify the advantages from EMA as sort of the research method of choice in a pandemic situation?
Well, I think it first, of course, depends on the research question, whether EMA is the go for a solution. And otherwise, I would say that all the advantages that EMA has in general, above like retrospective questionnaires and online surveys, just apply here too, because it's like a really great method to actually see how did individuals feel and what did they do during these extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah, the year of sleeping in.
Yeah.
Always forever remember it as.
I just wanted a bit to elaborate this research questions, what Anja just said, because we already discussed it before. What is the best methods? What is the methods of choice for anything? And then, of course, the idea or the final solution was that there is no best methods. There is, of course, every method is methods of choice for a specific question. And what we want to know during the pandemic, and not only we as researchers, but also the government or other agencies, how the mood, how the stress, how everything is fluctuating. And if you think about the questionnaires, and it, of course, just one measurement at a time. It doesn't provide you with that much information as what you would need. And so, of course, in our opinion, it's exactly the method of choice during the pandemic, because we are so interested in how our mood and how our experience is changing from the first lockdown to the second, from the second to the third, and how it is after a year. And if you think about this, then of course you need something like that to gather the data and to help then later everyone to come out of this situation.
Sure. And did you find that the participants themselves did you find them linking up in any way and discussing their experiences with each other with the study, or was that something that wasn't really discussed?
I think participants did not really discuss with each other because, it was basically not really possible, except that if they were two in the same household. But so we actually received some feedback from participants, and I would say overall it was really positive. I think they were actually rather happy that researchers cared and wanted to do research, and they were so engaged and really wanted to help. That was also in the end, they received some kind of financial compensations, but they had the possibility to actually donate. And I would say most of them donated their money. So this was another interesting experience.
Yeah, wow, that is really nice to hear. So I guess almost it's that whole having almost the effect of someone listening to you, even if it's a digital survey, like listening to your problems maybe has a therapeutic effect of some sort.
Could be, yeah. I mean, that we don't know really, but would be interesting for the next research question. Yeah, And I would say what was really helpful throughout is that if there were some technical problems that we could not solve, we of course could contact you and get some help. That was really helpful, and also the possibility to just check the data instantly throughout the platform to see, okay, how are the completion rates, what about missingness, and so on.
Yes, it's helped us to say, okay, now we have enough, because we needed to keep in mind how much money we have for the research. So of course it was awesome that we could calculate at least fast how many participants reach a certain completion rate. And what was also, it's what we liked very much, that for example, when a participant wrote us that they are experiencing some issues, that we didn't need to download everything. We could say, okay, we download only this Excel file for this particular participant. It's then faster to open, faster to deal with, to send it, to analyze it, and we can look on this data and say, okay, yes, we see you didn't receive prompts since, for example, yesterday. We will check, try this and that. So this is, of course, this was great and helpful.
And just to clarify for everyone watching, I didn't help in any way. It's the people down in the engineering department that would have fixed all their problems for them, and probably probably Moritz would have been a helpful person as well to be chiming in with all of these different things. So I guess getting to close, like, do you have any specific recommendations for other researchers who are planning on doing anything in ambulatory research during these times? Because we've just obviously had this pandemic, and it's hopefully a once in a century style event, and it's obviously still potentially ongoing. We don't know what the future holds completely, but there's no rule of nature that says that we will only face one at a time or one every 100 years. So do you have any kind of things that you've learned out of this that you would do differently next time, or when it comes to anything ambulatory that you'd recommend for other researchers?
So yeah, of course, in general, I would recommend to get familiar with the literature on how to plan and conduct EMA studies, because there are really quite a lot of decisions that have to be made in advance, depending on your research question, depending on your sample that you're interested in. And it, of course, helps, as in our case, to have a team around you that really thinks about your research question, that can give you input, and then can pilot your study. That is one big thing to recommend too.
So did you actually have your own team internally do a pilot run of the study design?
Yeah, we let interns and student assistants pilot it mainly, and also friends or family
members, of course.
Yeah, so it really helped to let them do the piloting and not ourselves, as well, to see like a more, lay person's perspective on how it works. But on the other hand, it's also important to pilot it yourself, because you as the researcher know when the prompt should come, and what about your branching? Does it really work the way you want? So it's both necessary. And pandemic specific, I would say you need to be able to work quickly and a lot, because you never know like when lockdown is over again. Oh, at least we didn't know that time. So you need to stay motivated and engaged, thinking about the bigger goal you want to achieve with your research, I would say.
Yeah, but also like to add that you need to learn how to work remotely. I don't think it's only pandemic related. I'm sure that there will be more and more opportunities how to conduct different research, cross-cultural research. And it's, of course, as we discussed before, there are so many tools like Zoom, Webex, whatnot. So you need to stay flexible. So there are new ways of communications are evolving. And then, of course, try to learn how to cleanse the data in R. Because when we had such huge data set, and we were very fortunate that we had such a super postdoc, Paul Forbes, that he initiated this all data cleaning script. And I never programmed in R before. I was learning, and it was a huge experience for me, but I was alone. It's just amazing how you can do with this open source softwares.
If you have any closing remarks, feel free, and obviously we'll play the interview, and then we'll obviously join for a bit of Q&A afterwards. Yeah,
I would have a remark. I would like, of course, to thank all the participants, because they shared with us really their private moments. And we, as Anja said before, we received emails, and we received really very private emails when they even said, I'm sorry, I can't participate because of this and that. And they even were apologizing for not finishing the study. And I'm sure many of them were really motivated because they knew how it's important for all of us. And it's of course great. And we always should think about this, that we are working with the participants, and we should like stay in touch with them and be there for them as well.
Remember the person behind the participant.
Exactly, not the numbers. Yes.
Yes. And so would this have been probably the most emotionally impactful study that you've been involved with?
For me, because before you asked what we did before this COVID study, I'm completely from another department. I was working on reaction time, so finger lifting, nothing so emotional. And at once I was brought into the study, and it's completely new world opens for me. And this email research, and thanks to Anja, I learned a lot from her. But of course, this emotional component, it was something new, what I never experienced before. And yes, this was really emotional as well.
Yeah, I had some experiences, as mentioned before, but so thanks, Katja. Yeah, so I knew like that's already something really, exceptional to really be able to see some, like get an insight into the daily life and emotions of participants. But I found great that we had like this good teamwork all together with 3 different working groups. And so I had just one maybe remark that it's like just important to really tell participants what to do in order to help them to stick to the plan. But also in a short way. So that was the challenge for me, I would say, and the learning.
Sure. I notice you're laughing there, Katja. Is that about being able to condense things down into the short way?
Yes, because I just remember when we discussed, there was like, what is 1 unit of a drink is for one question, and then we came up with a very short description of this. And then I had one participant who was writing me emails and convincing me with different sources that we did it wrong, and I sent him back other sources where we did it such way, and some participants want to have a really long explanation why we decided to do it such way but not the other. But I would say I'm together with Anja on this, that for the majority the shorter the better. So 2 pages of the manual was already a bit much.
Okay, well, I think we can wrap it up there, and thank you both very much.
Our next guest is Dr. Kathrin Finch. Kathrin completed her study of sports science at Saarland University in Saarbrücken, Germany. She then went on to do her PhD in the sports psychology unit at the University of Paderborn in the field of motor and cognitive development over the lifespan, before she went for a postdoc position at the Albert Ludwigs University of Freiburg, Germany. Since 2018, she's been a postdoc and research group leader at the Karlsruher Institute of Technology, completing her habilitation on physical activity and mental health foundations, methods, and digital interventions. We're going to discuss some of the studies that she was involved in when the pandemic hit and how she managed to redesign her studies and re-implement them so that she could continue her work.
Thank you for joining me for a start, and welcome. And I guess to launch into things, could you tell me a little bit about the research you were doing sort of before the lockdowns happened, if you were sort of in the midst of a project during the time, and maybe a little bit of a background on some of the work you've been doing over the past sort of 4 or 5 years?
All right. So that last question is a bit, well, tricky, and it's, yeah, there are many things I'm doing, but probably the most interesting projects I'm working on since I joined the KIT in Karlsruhe are, yeah, probably 3 projects which got affected by the COVID pandemic. And the first one is probably the one, yeah, which was affected the least, because it was kind of a science communication project. It's called the COM project. And actually, the pandemic helped us a lot because people were easier to reach out to, and they had plenty of time, and people are or were especially interested in all the science communication we prepared. So that one is a project which, yeah, wasn't really affected by the pandemic. Then another one which was affected, but yeah, where we worked through on a good way is the MOMO project. This is a motoric module.
Okay.
Yeah, a prominent project based at the KIT, which is about it's a longitudinal cohort study representative for Germany, where we monitor children and adolescents' physical activity. Yep. This one was also affected by the pandemic, as testing was ongoing, and we just need to interrupt all of it. But we found a good way to walk through, walk around, and started to implement an online testing, so that this project is also ongoing.
Okay, and so were you using physical activity sensors in that particular project with the kids?
Yes, we did before the pandemic.
Okay, and then you swapped it over to more of a survey-based scenario.
Fine, okay. Right. Unfortunately, we weren't able to implement all these accelerometry measures within the pandemic because there were thousands of children, and we were not able to send and collect. And
so it became a logistical scenario, primarily, like financial costs of actually getting the sensors back and forth. And
correct. So we stepped into just a self-report measures then. Right, but the project I want to talk about today, which was indeed also affected by the pandemic, is the so-called Smart Family project, and this is the project I'm working on since 3 years now.
Okay. Wow.
And just to tell you some details about the project. Actually, we designed and implemented an online or a mobile health application, which is based on the user's smartphones to enhance physical activity and healthy eating in a family setting. Especially the latter point is something new, because most mobile applications just are on individual levels, so are person specific, and we tried to use the family as a system approach, to get people, especially children, adolescents, but also the parents, more motivated to reach goals which they set as a family. So they are not individual levels, but on a family level.
So bringing the family together more as a team unit in order to sort of inspire, I guess, everyone to actually work towards things. Yeah. Okay.
Correct. We wanted the goal attainment to be more cooperative instead of competitive, as it is usually. If you know the Fitbit device or whatever, you can connect to other people, but it's always competitive. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to go around this competitive setting and wanted to implement a cooperative one. And if you feel like children and adolescents, what is their peer group to say they relate to the most? It's the family. So we thought it might be useful to tackle the whole family system when it is about physical activity enhancement.
Okay, that's really interesting, because like we're very big on like the Gemeinwohl-Economy model here, which points out that whenever economists say things like the competition is the best way to achieve an outcome in a market, and you say, can you show me some empirical evidence for that? They tend to wilt and fall away, because collaboration tends to actually produce the best outcomes within the market. So that's a really fascinating approach. Have you thought about also comparing it to adolescents and their peer groups within a study and seeing if that has like a collaborative effect that's also equally as good?
Right. We designed or implemented a control study kind of thing where we tackled our students. So we tried to get peer groups, so students who hang around a lot together or live together or things like that, and tried to make a comparison study with these student population.
Okay, so and that's ongoing at the moment also?
Yeah, it's ongoing.
Super. I'll be really fascinated to see which sort of grouping triumphs, I guess, in this context.
We do.
That's going to be interesting. And so obviously you're in the midst of this and doing physical activity sensors, tracking the participants and questionnaires, I assume, at some point. And then the world decided to throw us a bit of a curveball. So how did that affect like your approach for, I guess, one, recruitment of people, but also the actual day-to-day implementation of the actual project?
Right. Well, the COVID pandemic really influenced this special study because with the onset in March, we had several families running at the moment, and we decided to just interrupt data acquisition at that point in time because we were that naive that we thought probably the pandemic will be over in a couple of months and everything will be normal and we can start again.
I remember about those.
Well, so we stepped out of data acquisition between March and September. September because the big summer holiday started in July. So we had no data acquisition and started again in September.
Okay.
Because, well, we had a lot of time and a lot of brainstorming and discussions and things like that. And actually in May, we decided, well, it's not getting any better and we need to deal with that pandemic situation. So what are we able to do? And we found several possibilities, which we then worked on in that phase. So first of all, we digitalized all of our questionnaires, which was overdue because we still used paper pencil and that's a lot of work. And now we got like a kick in the ass of Corona.
Yes.
So we were able to digitalize all of our assessments. Good thing for us.
Sure. And you went with an online platform, I noticed. Is there any reason you chose an online platform as opposed to like a experience sampling sort of on the phone delivery? Because I find the surveys on the phone I will fill out, but when I get an email telling me to click here, enter this information, it just becomes it becomes a chore all of a sudden. So was there a reason for this choice?
Yeah, two reasons. One organizational reason. So the first thing is that our application is programmed by scientists of the University of Constance, and they were not able to implement the experience sampling into the app, not in that short period of time. Reason one, and the other reason is all these questionnaires are quite long. So it's not just an experience sampling of 10 questions or probably 20, which I would have definitely implemented into the application, but they are quite long. And we've got a pre-post follow-up survey evaluation. So the participants only use the application in the middle. So between the pre-measurement and the post-measurement. And we actually collect the sensors and the smartphones again from them, so they wouldn't be able to experience sample all of these questionnaires, especially in the follow-up period.
But if you used an independent experience sampling application, you could sort of program a schema for that. That was what I was thinking.
We thought about that. The problem is that all of our participants receive the smartphones with our application from us. So they don't run it on their own smartphones because that's a data problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's the thing we want to implement in the next version of the app.
Okay.
Definitely, because it makes it a lot easier, and we actually try to get the app running on participants' individual smartphones.
Okay. Super. Yeah, that's always a fun
journey
for the developers. Absolutely. And so I guess, how did you actually go about then, I guess, with the recruitment during lockdown, and given the sort of change in circumstances for everyone, and also providing them with this equipment? Like, how was that? I'm guessing previously they would come to the lab and maybe do some sort of interview and then collect the equipment. So what changed at that at that point in time?
Yeah, it's exactly how you said. So one of the family members actually came to the lab, collected all the things, all the smartphones, sensors and questionnaires for the whole family. They got introduced to everything. There was a small introduction to the app, how to use it. And participants were provided with a booklet containing some questions, frequently asked questions and answers to take home. However, we completely changed that whole procedure because, well, that's a good thing probably Corona did with us. So everybody is having Teams or Zoom or any other online platform. And now we changed the procedure and made an appointment with either a hands-free drop of all the materials in front of the lab. So we did it outside with only one person, hands-free, no introduction and anything like that. Or we provided participants with the opportunity to get all the materials per post. So we sent small packages and then made an appointment. And the good thing is now with online Zoom applications or things like that, the whole family was there. So we had an introduction to all participants and they were able to immediately ask questions. And that made it a lot easier for us. So we didn't have the problem of people calling the days after and asking questions again. So that was a good thing, and we will definitely keep going with that.
Okay, so I guess one benefit in that regard is that, it's a new method of implementation. So obviously, without maybe in the future, without all the sterilization and all the other sort of issues that are going into things at the moment. What about recruitment, though? Actually spreading the word and getting participants?
Yeah, actually, the good thing is that we had a lot of teaching lessons within that COM project where we learned of. So there's a SciComm courses we took at the NAVIC, so National Institute for Science Communication, which is also based in Karlsruhe, great thing. And we learned a lot and used these, all the things we learned about science communication and put it into practice. So we wrote lots of newspaper articles to recruit participants. We used mailing lists, we used social media, things like that. And I wasn't sure if it would work, but actually it did. And it did work quite well.
Excellent. So in a way, it sounds like you really adapted very quickly and pivoted and changed the methodology in a way that probably harmed this particular study less than, say, the other one that you were referring to. Do you worry about the validity of the data that you're getting now without the physical activity monitors in the other project, that it's all just self-reports, and the sort of the unreliability of that?
Actually, kind of, but We don't have the accelerometer alone, so we coupled it with self-reports and diaries. So we've got 3 different activity measures to compare for validity and reliability, which we actually did in a recently published paper. The thing I'm worrying about a little bit is that we actually wanted to measure real life activity, which is not really the case, as we sometimes needed to measure now within COVID restriction periods and with outside these restrictions, as it is just now. But well, we implemented control variables for all of that restrictions and try to control for that in our statistical analysis later.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine that's a very difficult process given just how arbitrary some of the rules were. It seemed that the government understood that dogs need to go outside occasionally, but people don't seem to need to in the eyes of the rule makers. So
definitely.
Yeah. So what sort of factors did you take in? The fact that I guess all the sport clubs were shut for such an extended period. Obviously, that's a massive reduction of activity, swimming pools, all those outside areas, even playgrounds, I believe, at one point were shut off. So
definitely.
Did you factor those sort of things in?
Right. We assessed which restrictions were in place. So closure of sports facilities, what you mentioned, and also for the adults, we examined if they were in home office or if they went to work, sure. Things like that. And lessons learned from the MOMO study are that exactly children or adolescents living in urban cities or in urban spaces, they are way more affected by the pandemic than those living in rural spaces.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, just the lack of, or I guess the population density and the lack of open areas to move. Okay.
Correct. That's another thing we check or we control for.
Okay, so super. And so you found that consistently. Do you find that consistently, even though before the pandemic, that children in the rural spaces were getting a higher level of activity than the children in urban spaces? Like, was that just a blanket rule?
Yeah, it is. There are studies showing that, but I think the differences became even larger now in the COVID pandemic.
Okay, so did the kids in the rural areas almost stay relatively the same, and the urban areas substantially decreased, or was there still a difference in the rural?
That's a good question, because in our MOMO study, in the first wave, so the lockdown last year, we found actually an increase in activity in children and adolescents. However, depending on where they live. So that's only true for people or for children living in or outside the cities with lots of green spaces. Oh. They used the time. They were in homeschooling. There was not a lot of, study lessons to attend. So they used their time and went outside playing, and they actually increased their activity. However, in the second lockdown, which was in winter, obviously, that trend diminished.
Once again, showing schools a big waste of time for you kids out there. That's right. So I guess also in the very first wave, the schools were not prepared in any way to do the online lessons in any structure whatsoever. It was really just, here's some work, ask your parents if there's a problem. And so I guess they had a lot more sort of free time throughout the day to exploit Definitely. This. And you know what, I would have too as a kid. Like, why not? The opportunity to go and just do other things. Go for
Actually,
it.
I did it too. Yeah. Because I didn't need to commute to work. That's 1.5 hours of sitting in the car for me. And these 1.5 hours I tried to use instead in going out, walking, cycling, whatever.
Yeah. Actually, yeah.
So that's probably the good thing about Corona if you want to search for something.
Well, yeah. I mean, ironically for me, I actually walk to my work, which takes me an hour and a little bit, which I then stopped doing. So I was actually more sedentary, ironically, but then I had to start factoring in other things and you know, realizing actually, no, I shouldn't just be putting in more hours of work. I should actually probably get up a little more, and got the standing desk out and got into sort of a little bit more activity. One of the big advantages, I guess, you had is that your study was an ambulatory study. And do you do any laboratory work whatsoever, or is it purely ambulatory? And why the ambulatory approach if that's all you do?
All right. Well, I like this ambulatory approach because you can capture just real-time data and real-life data. You don't need to get all the people into a laboratory with all these very strict, research protocols. Yeah, right. That's why I almost completely shifted my research from out of the laboratory into real life setting. Okay, and that's why I So
earlier you were doing a lot of laboratory things.
Yes. Actually, I've been in stress research, so you need to have the people come to the lab getting stressed and taking saliva samples and things like that. That's difficult outside the lab.
Yes.
But so I'm probably more interested in real life. So how do people live? What are they doing every day? Yeah. Where are the moments where we can, well, interrupt probably their sedentary behavior or their sedentary time? And what can we do to get them just more active?
Okay. And you're talking just about general overall activity levels throughout the day as opposed to particular high intensity. So that 24-hour activity cycle, good quality sleep, you know, a chunk of high intensity occasionally, but then really a lot of moderate or light activity throughout the day, like less sedentary time.
Right. Correct.
Okay. So have you got any interventions planned for the future, like potentially doing some, we offer some sensor coupling style arrangements where you can then trigger interventions and say, okay, you've been seated for X number of minutes. Maybe it's time to stand up and do some activity. Is that something that you're picturing in the future? Something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. Super. Good point. We just have a paper and a review around just-in-time adaptive interventions, and that's probably the next step to be done. Because we implemented that already in our application. So if a person is not active for at least, or is not doing at least 250 steps an hour, then he or she is becoming a push notification with a little motivation to get more active and to go and stand up and walk around. Okay. But research on GTIs, so just-in-time adaptive interventions, is just in its beginnings. So we need to learn and we need to figure out a lot about timing, about the motivation, about the message, and about, are people reacting to these messages at all? Sure. And this is what we're working on at the moment.
Okay, and are you working on just the timing of the message, or the particular messages on the way you're sort of communicating to them? Both?
Both.
Everything?
Both. Yep. There are multiple facets to take into account when implementing, calculating, designing these just-in-time adaptive interventions.
Excellent. And I guess to close, do you have any particular recommendations for other researchers who are thinking of doing an ambulatory study in, I guess, any times of pandemic? That doesn't, just because we're in the midst of one doesn't mean another one can't just jump up at us at any point, even though we keep talking about this, it's a once in 100-year thing. It's like, well, that doesn't mean we can't have another one start next week. So do you have any particular recommendations on how researchers can kind of change and adapt and continue their work?
Right. I would definitely recommend to use ambulatory assessment because, well, today we're heading into big data analysis and things like that. And ambulatory assessment gives us this great opportunity to sample many, many, many data points in short time, so we can evaluate changes over time in different individuals, between individuals, on a day level basis, well, if you want on a minute basis, whatever. And if you look for physical activity, that's especially important in children and adolescents who have very intermittent or changing, rapidly changing physical activity patterns. And that's the cool thing about ambulatory assessment. You can capture all of them and you can draw a full picture of 24-hour movement behavior. Great thing. And if you couple that with experience sampling, so you've got endless opportunities to answer research questions with great designs, with longitudinal data, with big data, and you've got endless opportunities to analyze this data. That's the cool thing about it.